Hello and welcome to another in the series of the making of Fast Cake songs. This one is the first song from the 2017 project, which will be coming out hopefully later in the year, otherwise it'll be a 2018 project, and it's called Wait for the Bell. I started when I had an old piano melody that I had in my head. I had a demo of it for several years, and I decided I quite liked it, so I was going to use it. So I took the idea for the melody, which was in G, and thought, right, well, I'll use it. But first I wanted to lay down a kind of a drone, because I knew the song was going to be all in one key, which is G. It meant that I could afford to have a drone all in the same key. So I started to build this drone backing. I did most of my previous recordings in the last couple of years on my Korg Kronos. So just for change, I decided to go back to my Roland Phantom X8 workstation, which is over here and covered in dust, and I decided to use that to build the drone sound. And the first thing I did was I got a string sequence, which was very simple in G, just a G arpeggio. And this is how it sounds. So it's basically that for, I ran it through for 8 minutes, because I didn't know how long the song was going to be. I think I ran it through for around 8 minutes, and so that was the start of it. I didn't think that was enough. So while I still had the tempo settings on the X8 set at that particular setting, I put together another sequence similar but a little bit more synthesizer, and I called it Bubbly Baba, mainly because it sounded a bit bubbly, but also the whole enterprise here was a little bit reminiscent of the Who's Baba O'Reilly, one of my all-time favourite songs. So I thought, well, I'm not stealing it, but I was inspired by it. So just for little shorthand notes on the mixer, I called it Bubbly Baba. And this is the second part of the sequence. So you can see it had the same notes, most of them, but there was a little bit of extra effects added. So what happened then was they got bounced down together. So they were over the top of each other, so it was building up. I decided to add a bass drone as well. I've got to point out, this is probably one of the most complicated songs I've ever recorded. It took forever, which is no bad thing. But it does mean that putting this making of together is quite difficult, because I'm having to dip into virtual tracks on the mixer and find out what I did at the very beginning, which I've forgotten most of it. But this is the bass drone. And it goes like that all the way through the song. And hearing that with the other 4 bits, 2 bits. There we go. So that was the drone sorted out. So I now had on tracks 14 and 15 the bounced drone sections, which is quite hypnotic, but it was a challenge to keep things interesting over the top for such a lengthy song, relatively speaking. So this is the piano melody. You may have noticed in the second part of that, when I repeat the melody, it's a lot louder, a lot brighter. Basically I played an octave higher as well, adding to the sound, and I bounced it down. The idea was to have the second part of the melody come through a lot stronger in the track, without me having to change faders or anything, and it's quite an effective thing when you listen to the final mix. So that was the main melody. I also added on track 11 another version of the melody. And you see that's got some kind of reversing effect, weird effects in the background. And that was basically put in the centre of the mix. The other parts were hard left and right, which is what I normally do. And the idea was just to give it a bit of body and a bit of, you know, strangeness. It isn't very high in the mix, that particular part, so you might not even hear it anymore, but it's there, if you know what I mean. So that was the main melody done. So the piano melody on 1, 2 and 11 formed the chorus eventually in the song, although I wasn't sure at the time. And what I did was I had the chorus come in at certain times and left gaps in between with nothing but the drone at that point. What I decided to do was to add a counterpoint string melody for the second chorus when it came around again. And this is what I come up with. And so when you hear that with the piano melody, it all makes a bit more sense. So there we had a nice counterpoint melody for the second chorus. Oh, really for the first chorus, because when the piano melody comes in the first time, it's really an introduction. There's no singing at that point. And so we come to the bass part. Bass part's quite often overlooked in my songs, always the weakest part usually, because I could do with a decent bass player to sit in, but never mind. Because it was all in G, it means that the scope was limited on the bass part. So for most of the song I limited myself just to octaves and fifths there. So apart from the central section, the bass was just doing octaves and fifths, but the central section, which is like an instrumental piece that I'd decided to put in, I hadn't worked out what was going in there yet, but I decided it was going to double up in speed and momentum, and one way I achieved this was I changed the bass part for that central section, and this is what it sounds like in the central section. So as you can see, it's a lot more active, and that gives the central section some drive. And so I had to add the drums. Initially all the other instruments were following the drone, so I had to add the drums in real time via the keyboard. First thing I did was some crash and hi-hat. Actually, when you listen back to the hi-hat on its own, it does go out of time a little bit, I'm afraid. I'm not the best of rhythm keepers, but once it's in the mix you don't really notice it, so I'll let that slide. Then I added a kick drum and a snare. So there you go, that was the kick drum and snare, so that's all the drums sorted out. Right, for the first part of the instrumental section, there was a string melody that I wanted to emphasise. So on tracks 22 and 23, I overlaid another set of strings just to boost the sound. we go, that was hard left and hard right stereo strings. Because I was running out of tracks, I only had 24 to play with, I had to actually put another part on this tracks 22 and 23. That was later in the song. There's a synth melody, so I added that on tracks 22 and 23. And on the fade out, I also used tracks 22 and 23 to add a synth melody, which I've kind of got the idea from a John Foxx solo track. So there you go, that's a melody that just happens on the fade out. Right, now we come to the guitar parts, and Nev Reed, my friend, came in to do the guitar parts, and I had about 4 or 5 different guitar parts worked out. The first one was kind of like a jangly rhythm, which kind of went all the way through the verses at least, and it was introduced at the start of the song. So there we are, that went all the way through the verses and made quite a nice addition to the sound. Next I added a kind of power chord part. Because it's a bit of a Baba O'Reilly rip-off, obviously it needed some Townsend windmill power chords, and this is, we used that from the start and also in the chorus. So there's one quite powerful guitar which is mixed down a bit, but you can still hear it. Right, the next guitar part just occurred in the instrumental section in the centre, and to assist with the momentum that I wanted to give that part of the song, I asked Nev to do like a chuggy rhythm, which he did. So that just occurs during the instrumental section.